from originally?
I'm originally from New Zealand. I was born in Wellington. My parents came to the States when I was 4, so immigrated over to Indiana. My parents got divorced. Moved to Arizona. That's where my childhood resided. Those 3 places: New Zealand, Arizona, Indiana.
What were some of your earliest exposures just to the arts that stuck with you?
The Diwali festival. Every year we always went. It's the Festival of Lights for those of you who don't know anything about Indian culture. And there's a rather large Indian community in Indiana, and my dad was always a big proponent in maintaining that part of our lives. So we would every year went to the Diwali festival, and when we had the opportunity to, would get to perform. And often there were dances, and I even still have a little trophy that I got at a Diwali festival. So that was probably my first exposure to performance. And then it was also in I don't have much memory of it, but The Wizard of Oz when I was a kid.
That's so funny because Joe's first acting role was The Cowardly Lion, Patty, The Wicked Witch, Shannon Elias, The Wicked Witch.
How funny. Well, I was a munchkin. There's no standout performance there.
You have a BFA in Technical Theater Production and Design from the U of A.
I initially went into the program a theater education major. I wanted to be a drama teacher, which thank God that didn't work out. My mom always told me I didn't have enough patience for it, and she's right. I love being able to work with grown adults whose parents aren't here to tell me how to handle them and who I can expect to behave a certain way, and if they don't, we can have an adult, clear conversation about it.
How were you first introduced to the Rogue?
Shannon Wallace. I had just moved back to Tucson after living in Portland and being away from theater, working in any type of theater for 8 years. And Shannon had heard I had stayed in contact and reconnected when I moved back, and she sent me a text and just said, "Would you be interested in stage managing?" And I was like, "Oh, I'm a little dusty, but I'll come in and talk to Joe and Cindy, and if they're willing to deal with the fact that I need probably some reminders along the way for the first time, let's try it out. Sure, why not?" I mean, I didn't have a job full time, so it was very good timing for me to just organically find my way back into theater.
And how was 12th Night? What did you learn right off the bat about working at the Rogue?
I learned that Shannon Wallace is amazing. Not that I didn't know that. She actually was my assistant stage manager for my senior capstone when she was at the U of A. So I got the opportunity to train Shannon, and then being able to come back and work under her and have her be like, "Hey, you remember this?" Was wonderful, and I was so grateful for the already established relationship that we had. And I think that leads into what I really learned about the Rogue was the importance of the relationships here.
What makes a good stage manager? I
can answer what I think makes me a successful stage manager, and that is, I think, my willingness to accept people 100% as who they are. I'm not walking into a room and asking you to change the way you communicate so that I'm comfortable with it. If you want to talk to me in this way, as long as it's not inappropriate or rude, that's fine, and I'm not taking it personally. I'm understanding that is how you're going to communicate your ideas, whether you be the director, the actor, one of our designers. It benefits you to be able to communicate in your style, and for me to be willing and open to it.
You have the biggest voice of any stage manager I've worked with. Where does that come from?
As in, I'm willing to be loud, or...
Sure.
Maybe because I was in performance, I'm not uncomfortable being loud.
But when you read from the scripts, you get very quiet.
That's very true. Well, that's not my words, I guess. I'm comfortable in myself. I'm confident in being a stage manager.
It's funny because I think a lot of actors get up on stage because they're more comfortable as someone else.
Well, that makes sense. I was not always this loud. Laura Littman encouraged me to continue to be the loud, stomping foot stage manager that I can be, and I love her for that. I was a junior, I think, when I worked with her at the U of A, and she was just so encouraging of the energy that I brought into the space. And I think working here has also been, encouraging of being myself. I didn't realize that I was the loudest stage manager until I was told that I was, and it was too late to stop being myself. But I think y'all like it. I'm still here.
When something goes wrong in rehearsal, the stage manager is typically the first responder. Can you think of any times when you felt like you saved the day, or when you had to do something unusual to keep the process going?
We had a costume piece. It was a tie pin that was important for the show, and one of the little balls for the tie pin had gone missing. And I realized that the gauge matched the gauge in my belly button ring. So I took the top of my belly button ring off and just put it on the tie pin, and was like, okay, we gotta go, let's go. So you're just thinking like way outside of the box. Nothing that would be your immediate instinct if you were, going from a textbook is going to answer those questions. So it's about just being like, well, what's going to work right now?
Being present.
Yes.
You've got a unique vantage point as a stage manager, being positioned just above and behind the audience. Mm-hmm. What, if anything, have you learned in all your time watching audiences watch plays?
There's always somebody with their phone on. It's so interesting to me to see when an audience gloms onto a certain type of humor, and they'll do it collectively. Like if there is somebody in the house that has very strong feelings about the dark humor in the show, and they are sharing that through their laughter, everybody else in the audience who's enjoying that dark humor is going to happily join in. But if somebody's here and they're loud about the romance in the show, and that they're gasping with it, or they're awing when the ingenues come on, right, then that's what the audience plays into. So it's funny to see how everybody comes with their own opinions, right, but even as an audience, they can be swayed by each other's responses. And I think that's fun to watch and see how the energy moves differently through an audience based off of the louder voices.
What's the most stressful or challenging part of the job?
Probably for me, preparation, but that's just because I'm such an overthinker. What allows me to feel comfortable and relaxed and able to move on my feet and be flexible in the space is the level of preparation that I do beforehand. Hussein, my husband, is very kind and helps me navigate that, but he's always like, imposter syndrome doesn't exist. It's not a thing. You don't have it. It's fine. You got this. You know what you're doing. It's something that was made up. You know exactly what you're doing every time.
A show closes, 2 days go by, and I have no idea how to direct a play ever
It's
again.
amazing.
It's crazy.
And then you get back in the room and you're like, oh, I know how to do this.
Yeah.
It's riding a bike.
Yeah.
But when you're not on the bike,
Yeah.
it's the scariest thing in the world. All of a sudden you're like,
Yeah.
that thing's on a high wire, and
Yeah.
I've got to balance flames while I'm doing it.
What's the most rewarding or satisfying part of the job?
Oh, I love so many parts of my job. I guess the fact that I get to see the show from start to finish, because you get to really see the little nuances and the growth. I mean, by the time we're in shows, 15, 16, you're seeing the tiny gestures that the cast are making to each other to support one another on stage that nobody's even thinking about outside of themselves. Being privy to all of the layers that it takes to create the success that we have here is very rewarding.
How's this season been?
It's been amazing. Left Hand of Darkness felt so much like a workshopped piece, right? We were changing things constantly. And then, all the way through performances, even still, because our cast was changing due to COVID, right? So it was, who's standing on the box tonight at the top of the show? Do we have the box? Who's not going to be dizzy if we put them on the box? And then Under Milkwood was just a blast from top to bottom. I'm gonna cry thinking about it. I love that show. It was so sad to say goodbye to it.
I was ready to go on tour.
Yeah, and I will. People, buy the tickets. Just such a beautiful piece. And the relationship element, the exchange of energy, just beautiful. And I loved it. And Love Labor's Last, where it's going to be great. I'll love it too.
Hannah.
Sorry.
No!
She's emotional, people. There we go. Also allows me to be a good communicator, right?
Yeah.
Love Language Lost is a show that I've never worked on. And Shakespeare's always fun for me because I don't understand it ever on the first read. Language on paper has been intimidating to me my whole life. And being able to come into the Rogue makes it feel accessible. Spending the time around the table that we do, being in a space where we're talking about language so beautifully and in a way that's meant to help others understand, not to make you feel like an idiot for not understanding. And I think those are two very different important things to recognize, has allowed me to fall in love with language in a way that I never thought I would.
Next season, you're going to be stage managing 4 of the 5 plays.
Yes.
Every year, you're sort of gradually taking over more and more. What keeps you coming back?
The people. 100% the people. I mean, the work is amazing too. I love this space particularly because I've never felt more myself in the stage management role than I do here. And there's something freeing about that. As silly as it is, like, when I have cramps, I can walk in and be like, I've got cramps, Joe, and he'll go get me a heating pad. Like, that's not something you would normally do in a work setting, right? Hey, boss, guess what today is? The relationships are so important. And I've worked in a lot of different places in many different industries, and I think being able to show up no matter how you are and feel like that's okay and it's safe is so important. So I've got strong days where I come in here and I'm a rock, right? And then there are days when I come in and I've just had a rough day and I can chat with Shannon for 5 minutes and come into rehearsal and be exactly who I need to be for the cast, right? So I get from this space as much as I give. And that's not always the case.